Morning, it's the Unknown Mechanic back again. And this channel is for the shop owner who doesn't have technicians that are up to par and always needing help proceeding through a job and can't complete it on their own. And it's also for the aspiring mechanic who would like to, learn how to proceed through a job start to finish without making mistakes and constantly needing help. And also for the homeowner do-it-yourselfer who wants to learn about, their own chainsaw repair or power equipment repair. And today's episode is going to be, really important for the DIY person because we are going to do some troubleshooting and diagnostics. This chainsaw is an Echo Timberwolf CS590, and it belongs to Greta Tootbutt. And she states that won't start, repairs necessary, check for impacted Asperger in the exhaust system, leading to constipation all the way up to a tiny void within a very, very dense bone cranium. Oh, and it also says, how dare you fix greenhouse gas emitting chainsaws? Well, I don't know what to make of that. I think I'm going to ignore that. Sometimes when the service writer checks a machine in, they just document what the customer states, and it's your job as a mechanic to take some of that with a grain of salt. So this chainsaw, I've had a lot of crappy mechanics that worked for me in the past, and some of them were marginal and some of them were just awful. And I had a mechanic look at this saw, and he worked on it for several hours, and he couldn't fix it. And so it got dumped in my lap. I always have to come along behind people and fix their mistakes. And we call that mechanic Einstein. That's his nickname. Because, Albert Einstein said that if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and you're expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. So Einstein, he did a whole bunch of stuff to this. Now, I'm not talking about Albert, I'm talking about my Einstein. And he couldn't get it to run. He said that, it started and ran once, very briefly. And so, when I ask questions, I already have 2 or 3 follow-up questions that are in back of the first question. And, if I get very vague word salad answers, that's not really going to lead to, finding out what the real problem is. And Einstein's really bad for that. You ask him a direct question and you get his mouth opens up and he says something before his brain responds. And what comes out is like, word salad diarrhea. And it's, you can't, make a follow-up question and narrow down what the problem is. So all I was able to get out of him was that he had replaced the spark plug, and the plug was wet. And I asked him, did you pressure test the fuel line to see if the carburetor was stuck in flooding the engine? And he didn't. He said he took the carburetor off and pressure tested it, and that's not going to test the line and the fuel filter and so forth within the tank. He did show me that the spark plug that was in there, customer had changed it. This is a HIPAA spark plug. It's a Chinese clone copy of an NGK. So, what he's got in there is the correct plug. He's got an NGK BPM 8Y. And one thing that, maybe a DIY person won't be able to have access to as easily as a dealer is I like to print these service data sheets. And so I printed one for the CS590, and I've highlighted a few things in here. And, the compression pressure, the spark test, gap with the plug in the engine and with the plug out of the engine, and the actual spark plug electrode gap. It's supposed to be 24 to 28 thousandths, and these NGKs come pre-gapped at 26. So, unless he dropped it and it landed directly on the ground electrode and closed the gap off, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I'll be checking that. And Echo, even they have an engine evaluation guide, and it's a step-by-step procedure, which is good for a new apprentice mechanic to go through all the steps without skipping or overlooking something. And I'm going to be kind of doing my own evaluation here. I didn't print Echo's evaluation sheet, but I know what to do because I've done thousands of them. One of the first things we're going to do is check the fuel, drain the fuel out. There might be water in it, could be old and stale. Looks a little dark, but there's definitely, it's a blue tinted color, so it's got oil in it. And I asked Einstein, if he tested the compression. He said that the compression was good, that he even took the muffler off. He didn't find any impacted Asperger stuck in there. And he said the piston was like brand new. And, he was aware that there's a decompression button here. And obviously, if you test the compression with the deco valve on, you'll get a false reading, a lower than normal reading. So he was aware of that. I do like to do a visual inspection, and I can see that this saw has very low hours on it. It's brand new. The paint isn't even worn off the bar. This chain doesn't look like it's even been sharpened one time. So we've got a brand new saw here. We check the air filter. There's zero dust in there. I don't know if Einstein cleaned in there or not, but maybe not. Maybe this is the way it came in. The air filter is almost 100% clean. No issue there. Let's see. Let me take the plug out, get ready for a compression test. Okay, the plug is wet. That could be that the carburetor, the needle valve in the carburetor is being held open by a dust bunny from the factory. And maybe the carburetor is flooding and drowning the engine, and that's why it won't start. So part of my troubleshooting is, you have to have yourself a good pressure tester, and you want to go fishing for the fuel line. And that filter is brand new. It's got a double clamp on it. 2 clamps. And you want to pump this up to, you know, maybe 7 to 10 psi, about half a bar. If you over pump this and get this 20-30 pounds up to pop-off pressure, it's possible that you could distort and damage the fuel pump diaphragm. So you don't want excessively high pressure when you're testing. So that is that passed. That was no leak down. No issue there. If it did leak down, it could also be a hole in the fuel line. And what you would do if it failed that test is then you would remove the carburetor or the fuel line off the carburetor and test directly at the carburetor to bifurcate the problem and determine if it's the fuel line or the carburetor. So, but it passed, so do anything there. Let's just do a little. Okay, it's pretty free. Right. Make sure the compression release is not on. If the deco valve is on, you'll get a false reading on your compression gauge. Okay, and we are about 134. The book says it's supposed to be 146. It's a little bit low, but maybe that's because this engine is brand new. I think that is still acceptable. So these are checking out, so I think I'm going to try to start it. Put the fuel back in, so I don't see any problem with that fuel. And maybe we should test the spark while this is out. He said he tested it. I just want to be sure. So the spark tester gap spark test. Okay, tester gap without the spark plug in the engine is supposed to be 6 millimeters. So what you do with these testers is you dial this down to 0, and each turn is 1 millimeter. So that's 0. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a pretty big gap. And then we have to find a good ground for this. And make sure that the ignition switch is on. That's off, that's on. See a very good spark. Bring that in for a close-up. Good spark. Okay, so we put it back together. Okay, so I'm going to pause the camera and we're going to move the camera outside. I don't like to start the saw in the shop. Too much smoke, too much noise, so I'm going to pause for a sec. Okay, I'm back inside after an unsuccessful start and test run. Two things that I noticed is that I could smell a lot of gas, and more importantly, I noticed also that when I was pulling the rope, the chain is moving. So there's definitely something going on with either the clutch or the oil pump, or both. So first thing I'm going to do is take the bar and chain off, make it easier to work on. And I think the engine might be flooded. And so when I primed it, that just added more fuel to a drowning engine. You know, I asked Einstein if it was flooded, and he told me that he blew air in the cylinder and you know, put a new dry spark plug in it. And so let's just set this aside for a minute. Okay, this clutch drum is supposed to spin freely. Perhaps I see very, very slight evidence of heat here on the cover. Possibly Greta was running this with chain brake on and got something hot. So there's definitely something wrong there. But before I take that apart, I want to find out if this really is flooded. There's also another remote possibility that the flywheel key might be sheared. In extreme cases, if you get a hydraulic lock of fuel or oil in the cylinder and you pull the rope like Hercules, you can shift the flywheel and shear the key. So that's also a possibility. That would explain why you've got good compression, you've got fuel, and you've got spark, but it won't run. It's because it's way out of time. So I think I want to check that too. Okay, that plug is very wet. Definitely a wet plug, and I can smell fuel. I'm going to take the muffler off. Yeah, I see a lot of fuel coming from the deco valve too, kind of running down this corner of the cylinder. I think this saw might be flooded. Okay, there's a lot of fuel under the muffler. And now we've got fuel coming out of the muffler. So yeah, this saw is definitely flooded. I'm going to have to, blow air through the muffler, the exhaust port, the cylinder, the spark plug hole, the deco valve, dry off the plug, and start over there. That's probably why it won't start and run. But having a clutch issue here, that is a parasitic load. And if you're pulling the starter rope and something is frozen in this and you're trying to turn the chain around the bar by hand, your arm cranking RPM is way lower than the idling RPM of the engine when it's idling and running. And so having a parasitic load slowing down your cranking speed can make it very hard to start and easy to flood. So we're going to pop this off here and take a look. Of course, doesn't want to come off. Looks like our clutch bearing has broken. Got a clutch bearing problem. One other thing I could do, take the starter off. thread on that one. Pay attention to how the wires are routed here. There's a little area where this wire is routed through where it won't get pinched. When that goes back together, that's going to go back in there. Okay, let me see another clue here. Bring you in for a close-up here. Okay, that paint dot on the flywheel nut, that flywheel I don't think has shifted at all, because otherwise that paint would be out of position. So I'm not going to bother taking the flywheel off and checking the key. I think that's okay. Well, this saw has air injection. I didn't know that. Copied that from Husky. Okay, I'm going to have to pause the camera for a minute because I'm going to have to get some tools to pull this drum off. So I'm going to be back with some pliers. Okay, back with some pliers. Okay, well the clutch bearing looks okay. There is a little evidence that it did get hot. I think our oiler gear is melted. Behind the clutch there is a drive tang on the oiler gear that engages this notch in the drum. And I think our oiler gear has been overheated and is binding on the crankshaft. I'm going to have to find the right tool to remove the clutch. So I'm going to pause again and go search in my toolbox for Echo clutch remover. Okay, went and raided the toolbox, and in this Echo CS590 service data sheet, the very last page has the service tools that apply to this model. And you know, I can see that they're using this style of piston stop and that style of clutch remover. And when you're using these tools, you know, I can see that I'm not the only one who uses these, but there are burrs on these clutch pins, and that is from a mechanic using the improper tools to remove the clutches. And I know who did that. That was Speedy. Speedy, he will do. He just boop, boop, boop with any kind of power wrench. And one time I caught him with a metal piston stop in an engine and a clutch removing tool and using an impact gun and hammering the piston against the piston stop. I almost had a heart attack. You never want to do that. When you're using these tools, any kind of a piston stop, you're going to be using hand wrench only, no impact wrench. So, and some of the new, more modern saws, I recently went to some steel training in Virginia Beach, and they stressed that a lot of the low emission engines that have stratified charge with the pistons and extra ports, the pistons have cutouts, and in order to make the piston lightweight for all of those additional passageways on the piston skirt, they had to thin down the crown of the piston. And they want a different type of a piston stop other than one that touches the crown of the piston. It goes over into the side of the combustion chamber in the squish area where the skirt and the wrist pin and so forth is very strong. Out in the center of the piston where the crown is, they're thinner on those low emission engines. And if you were to use this style of piston stop in an engine like that, you could actually punch a hole in the top of the piston, even with hand tools. So I've got my Echo clutch remover on there, and we're going to thread this in, and it's going to require a 19 millimeter socket. Okay. And that came off actually fairly easily. And so this is where our trouble is. There's definitely, okay, we have some melting going on here. Okay, that is the problem. This is not supposed to be melted. I think old Greta was running this with the chain brake on for a few moments until some smoke started to come out of it. So we've got a compound problem here. Engine won't start because it is it's flooded big time. And also a parasitic load from the engine when you're pulling the rope, trying to drag the oiler gear and the drum and the bar and the chain along while you're pulling the rope. That is going to make it very hard to start. So I am going to have to look up this oiler gear. I think this bearing survived. This is a metal caged bearing, so the cage is not plastic and it can handle a little bit higher temperature than a bearing with a plastic cage. Might be able to reuse that bearing, but I'm definitely going to need this oiler gear. So I'm going to pause the camera and I'm going to do some parts lookup. If we don't have these parts, this machine will be waiting parts. Okay, I'm back from some parts lookup, and unfortunately we do not stock these two parts. The oiler gear is made out of metal, but looks like there is a little bit of heat damage on the worm there. The driven gear and the pump appears to be okay, and the pump is not plastic, so I'm not too worried about that. This collar is most of the problem, and so often my videos are too long, so I think I'm going to call it here. I can assure you that after I repair this oil pump and clear the gas out of the muffler and the cylinder. Start with a dry spark plug in a functioning oil pump that doesn't add parasitic load while you're trying to pull the rope. This saw will run perfectly like a brand new saw. It obviously was run with the brake on until something started to melt, and that's the issue. And so what you're going to get out of this video is that you have to use all of your senses when you're troubleshooting. You do visual inspection and look for something out of place. You use your ears. You listen for strange noises. You use your nose if you smell gas or something burning. All of those things come into play when you're troubleshooting and diagnosing a problem. So I'm going to call the video here. I'm 100% sure that the saw is going to run after I repair it, and we'll return it back to the customer. And so if you like my videos, you can give me the thumbs up, leave a message, and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next one. I don't know what it will be, but it'll be something useful. If you have any requests, you can leave a request in the messages. So that's it for today, The Unknown Mechanic.